The chandelier light caught the crystal like it always did, cold, precise. Indifferent.th. HREE 100 guests stood beneath it in black tie and borrowed perfume, holding glasses of a Sonoma wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The marble ballroom of the Piton Mansion on Meeting Street had been open twice a year for 58 years. It had never once failed to impress. That was its only register. SHE raised her glass. Eleanor Piton, 71 years old, 4 strands of pearls at her throat. A kind of stillness that comes from decades of deciding things lifted her champagne flute and let the room hush itself around her. It always did. Rooms had been hushing themselves around Eleanor since 1987, near the service corridor. Outside a dimmer panel he had no business being near in a borrowed suit with shoulders a quarter-inch too wide, stood a man named Silas Renwick. He did not hold a glass. He held himself very still instead. ELEANORs carried clean and cold acros. Ice 300 people who had all stopped breathing. TOO poor to buy the silver on this table, Mr. Renwick. Too poor to court my daughter. Hadley froze between them. Silas did not answer. He did not move. In his inside pocket sat a folded envelope unopened. Dated 3 days earlier that contained the one document that would end Eleanor Piton's reign before the night was through. ELEANOR smiled. Her own line. SHE did not know she had just declared war on the man who owned her company. But what happened next? Nobody expected. April arrived in Charleston the way it always did, slow and humid. The azaleas opening on Trad Street like small acts of confession. Silas Renwick signed the lease on the Anson Street cottage on the 14th. Paid 6 months in advance with a cashier's check drawn on a Boston account that no one in town would think to query. The cottage was small. 2 bedrooms, a porch with a single rocking chair, a magnolia in the back that scraped the gutter when the wind came off the harbor. REN picked her room. Silas took the other. ON the second morning. His 8-year-old daughter found a screen door at the back of the porch that didn't close right. She showed it to him in the language all 8-year-olds speak, which is mostly pointing. Silas knelt, looked, and said the hinge was old. Said he would fix it. H did not fix it that day. He did not fix it that week. The door stayed crooked, because the only way to make sense of leaving Boston was to let small Charleston things be. Exactly as small as they were. 4 blocks south on Trad Street, the Beaumont Inn sat in its 1847 brick and oyster shell mortar. The flagship of Piton Hospitality Group, and the reason Silas had come to Charleston at all. He walked the site with the previous foreman on a Tuesday. The man pointed at the ceiling plasterwork, the failed cornices, the second-floor structural beam that had been quietly sagging for 11 years. Silas listened. He had already read the engineering repo. Art twice on the plane, down. The project kickoff was Thursday. He arrived 10 minutes early in a clean denim shirt and work boots that had seen real sights. Hadley Piton walked in 2 minutes after the hour alone. Oh no, assistant. A leather portfolio under one arm. She was 36. She introduced herself to him by his first name. She introduced him to no one else. Can you imagine the room in that moment? A man who knew exactly what he was walking into. A woman who had no idea who had just walked through her door. Silas opened the structural drawings on the table and read them the way a copyist reads a score, not panel by panel, but all at once, in chord. He flipped to sheet 3, tapped a connection detail at the second-floor beam, and said only, "This will fail under live load if we don't sister it before the demo begins." Hadley looked at the sheet. Then she looked at him. The look held 1 second longer than a contractor's look should have held. That evening, back at the Anson Street cottage, Silas sat at the kitchen table with an old envelope he had carried since Boston. Inside was a single photograph. A woman named Marin. Summer of 2011, standing on the front steps of the Beaumont Inn in a yellow cotton dress, sun on her hair. The magnolia in the background. SHE would have been 38 now. HE turned the photograph face down on the table. Ren came in barefoot, holding a cracker. "Daddy, where are we?" Silas looked at the back of the photograph for a long moment. WHERERE. Mommy used to be. Ren nodded as if that explained Charleston entirely. Then she asked when dinner was. 3 weeks into the demo phase. Silas spread the subcontractor bids across the cottage dining table on a Saturday morning and stayed with them past midnight Sunday. By 6 o'clock Monday, he had the analysis written out on a single sheet of cream paper in his own hand. The historic plasterwork package was 38% above market. The vendor was Heritage Restoration Specialists, LLC. The principal of Heritage Restoration Specialists, LLC was Bradford Patton Hadley's first cousin, son of Eleanor's late brother. A contractor could have ignored it. Plenty had on plenty of jobs, in plenty of cities. The line item was inside the budget envelope. The work would get done. The premium would get absorbed. Nobody would ask. Silas did not ignore it. He left the page on Hadley's desk at the temporary site office at 7:20 in the morning before she arrived. The page was annotated in tight, even handwriting comparable transaction benchmarks across 4 South U-turn preservation projects. On IRR calculation on the embedded overcharge over the life of the contract. And at the bottom, one line of citation, a Delaware Chancery case on the fiduciary duty of controlling shareholders. He signed it with 2 letters. SR. Hadley read it at 8:04. She read it again at 8:11. She did not call Bradford. She did not call her mother. She did not walk down the hall and as, Silas Renwick, what kind of contractor signs a bid analysis with a Delaware Chancery citation? She sat at her desk, watching the harbor light catch the cornices of the building across King Street. And then she opened a new email to the project's compliance council and requested a quiet rebid of the plasterwork package under Standard Arms. Height-length protocol. The rebid came in 19% lower. The contract was reissued the following Tuesday. Bradford Patton called Eleanor on Wednesday afternoon. Eleanor listened. Eleanor did not call Hadley. Eleanor opened her laptop and typed 3 words into a search bar. Silas Renwick. Contractor. The results were thin. A Boston builder's license. A small LLC registered in Massachusetts. A photograph from a Cambridge nonprofit board dinner 4 years old in which Silas wore a suit and stood beside a woman whose face was angled away. Off from the camera. Eleanor closed the laptop. She picked up the phone to her assistant. Pull everything you key. On the foreman of the Beaumont Restoration. Quietly. That same Wednesday, Hadley passed Silas on the 2nd floor landing of the Beaumont. He was carrying a level. She was carrying a binder. Neither of them stopped. She said only, the plasterwork rebid came in cleaner. He said only glad to hear it. Neither broke stride. But Hadley turned at the top of the stairs and watched him walk out of the corridor. She watched him the way a person watches a door she has been told never to open. As she had been told all her life that no one outside the family ever saw what she saw, the small thefts, the soft fraud, the ways an empire bled itself in the dark. She had been told she was paranoid. She had been told she didn't understand legacy. And here was a man in work boots who had read 4 sheets of drawings and 1 column of numbers and seen exactly what she had been seeing for years. She did not know who he was. She did not know what his hands had done before Charleston. She did not know whose name was on his lease or whose grave he visited on long weekends in October. She only knew this for the first time in 11 years. She was not the only one looking. But then something happened that changed everything. The Saturday at the end of May was the kind of Charleston morning that justified the city's existence. The harbor light came in low and gold across the battery. The cicadas had not yet started. The magnolia in the walled garden behind the Beaumont was at the brief white peak of its bloom. Silas brought Wren to the site because she had asked nicely, and the demo crew had the day off. He let her play in the garden while he sat upstairs on the 2nd floor with a clipboard and the slow, exact work of measuring a window casing that hadn't closed properly since 1971. Hadley came down the brick path at 10:15. She hadn't known the child would be there. She came most Saturdays because the walled garden was the only place inside Patton property that hadn't ever once felt like Patton property. Wren was crouched at the base of the magnolia, examining a fern. Hadley sat beside her on the brick edging and asked the fern's opinion of the weather. Wren, without looking up, said the fern was busy. Hadley laughed once. It was the first time she had laughed inside Patton property in 9 months. She marked the fact privately, the way a woman marks the date of an unexpected letter. She did not say it out loud. After a moment, Wren said, "My mommy is in heaven." Daddy says heaven is the place where magnolias are quietest. Hadley did not answer right away. She watched the fern with Wren for a while. Then she said, I had a cousin once who said almost exactly that. She loved this garden more than any place in Charleston. She taught me to read a balance sheet when I was 16. We used to sit on the bench right there every Sunday. And she would point at the magnolia and say it was the only honest thing on the property. Wren looked at her. What was Ake name? Marin. Wren tasted the word once, silently. Then she nodded and went back to the fern.upstairs. The second-floor window of the Beaumont was open 6 inches for the breeze. Silas had heard every word. He did not move. He did not move for a long time. The pencil rested on the clipboard. His hand rested on the pencil. Outside, his daughter was talking to a stranger about her dead mother, and the stranger was telling her about a woman she had loved, who had also been his wife. And the 2 women were the same woman, and no one in the garden knew. He set the clipboard down with the care of a man putting down something that might break. He came down the back stairs 10 minutes later, took his boots off on the porch by habit, walked into the garden in his stocking feet. Wren ran to him. Hadley stood. Aisha looked at him with a new kind of looking. He looked back at her with the same. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them moved closer. After a moment, Hadley said, She was barefoot in this garden once, in a yellow dress. 2011, I think. I have a photograph somewhere, Silas said. I know the dress. That was all. He did not explain. She did not ask. They stood in the garden until Wren's attention turned to a butterfly, and it pulled them gently back to a smaller, easier conversation. The unnamed thing was now a thing they were both carrying. Eleanor returned from New York on the 2nd of June in a foul, polished mood. 3 days of meetings with a private equity firm about restructuring the Paton bond covenants had not gone the way she would wanted. She was at her King Street office by 5:30. She walked past Hadley's open door without looking in. The annual Paton Charitable Foundation Gala was set for the 17th. Black tie. 300 guests. The mayor, the bishop, the head of the Historic Preservation Board, 4 major donors who had not donated in 3 years and needed to be reminded why they should. On the 8th of June, Greta, Eleanor's assistant of 22 years, walked into Hadley's office and set a small ivory envelope on her desk without a word. Greta never stayed when she delivered envelopes from Eleanor. Hadley opened it at her desk. It was not a request. It was a paragraph and a half. At the gala, Eleanor wrote she would be announcing Hadley's engagement to Whitman Ashcroft, Ivy's son of the Ashcroft banking family of Broad Street. The Ashcrofts had been Paton allies for 4 generations. The match had been discussed at length with Whitman's father over a private dinner in March. Hadley would understand. The announcement would be tasteful. Greta would handle the press list. Hadley had not met Whitman Ashcroft Ivy in 8 years. The last time, he had been 26 and had spilled a champagne flute on her shoes at a Spoleto opening. She walked to Eleanor's office, closed the door. Did not sit. You did not ask me. I did not need to. Mother, you will marry someone who matches. To the Empire, Hadley. Whitman is suitable. His family is suitable. The timing is suitable. We are not living in a country where daughters of houses like ours wait to be courted by men who can afford them. Hadley stood in the doorway for one long, still moment. Then she walked out. She drove south through the historic district with the windows down, past the marina, past the house she grew up in, and did not slow down. She had spent her entire life accommodating Eleanor's certainties. The accommodations had become so quiet, she had forgotten what they cost. What she didn't know was, that same evening, on the other side of Charleston, in a parking lot off East Bay Street, Foster Linwood, 62 years old, Paton Family Corporate Counsel for 34 years, handed Silas a sealed envelope through a car window and said, "It's time." Silas took the envelope. He did not open it. He drove back to the Anson Street cottage and put it in his inside breast pocket and looked at Marin's a photograph on the kitchen table for a very long time. He drove to the Beaumont. He parked on Anson. He walked around to the harborside porch, the one the crew didn't use, and stopped. Hadley was already there, sitting on the top step in the dark. Shoes off. He came up the path quietly. He sat down on the step below hers and set a cold bottle of water on the brick beside her hand. She picked it up, drank, set it back down. The harbor lights blinked across the water. A shrimp boat moved out past Sullivan's Island. Slow and patient. 23 minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. When Hadley finally stood, she rested one hand briefly on his shoulder on the way past. Just once. The way a person touches the post of a railing she trusts. Then she walked down the path to her car and drove home. Silas sat on the step alone for another hour. He did not turn on the flashlight. The envelope stayed sealed in his pocket. He had not yet decided what opening it meant, but he was running. Out of time, the 17th of June arrived hot and clean. 300 guests in black tie. The catering was Charleston rice and oysters. The chandeliers had been polished by hand on Wednesday by two women who would not be invited to any room in the house in which their work hung. The ballroom was at its best. It was always at its best. Silas was there as crew. The lighting installation had been added to the project's scope at the last minute, and the crew lead was expected on site through the evening to manage the temporary rigs and the dimmer panel near the service corridor. He wore a borrowed black suit. The shoulders were a quarter-inch too wide. He did not care. In his inside pocket, the envelope from Foster Linwood sat folded unopened exactly where it had been for 3 days. Hadley saw him from across the room at 8:12. He crossed. She stopped a foot away, looked at the dimmer panel he was pretending to check, and said, "Thank you for the water." He said, Of course," she said. "She's announcing it tonight." He said, "I know." They stood there for another moment, talking about nothing visible. And across the room, Eleanor watched them with the still, patient face of a woman who had already decided. Whitman Ashcroft Ivy approached Hadley from the bar at 8:19, smiling the smile of a man who had been told what was about to happen. Hadley took one half-step back. Whitman's smile did not falter, but the room saw the half-step. 3 women near the dais saw it. Eleanor saw it. Eleanor set down her glass. She crossed to the service corridor where Silas stood and spoke to him alone by the window. She had a folded check in her hand. "Twice your annual income, Mr. Renwick. Cashier's check. You finish the Beaumont through your crew lead, by proxy. You leave Charleston in the morning and you take the child with you. The Piton family wishes you well in Boston." Silas looked at the check. He looked at her. He did not raise his voice. He did not stiffen. He said only, "No, ma'am." Eleanor's eyes changed. She had expected anger. Anger she could manage. The calm was worse. She walked back to the center of the ballroom. She lifted her glass. The hush spread out from her in a circle. "Before I welcome our extraordinary guests," she said, "I must address something that has distressed me this evening. There is a tradesman in this hall tonight who has been mistaken about his place in our city." The room turned. "He is too poor to buy the silver on this table, Mr. Renwick. Too poor to court my daughter. I trust you will not embarrass yourself further by remaining." Hadley froze between them. 300 people did not breathe. Silas did not move. He looked at Eleanor Piton across the ballroom with the quiet of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just, finally decided to set it down. His hand went to his inside pocket. His fingers rested on the sealed envelope. Eleanor smiled at her own line. She did not know what she had just done. 3 days after the gala, on the morning of the 20th of June, Silas walked into the wine cellar of the Beaumont Inn at 1:58 in the afternoon. Foster Linwood was already there. On 847 brick. Climate controlled. The door locked from the inside. Foster set 3 manila folders on the oak tasting table. The first, Renwick Holdings, Massachusetts Limited Partnership Principal, Silas Renwick, through 14 nominee LLCs registered in Delaware, Nevada, Wyoming, and 1 in the Cayman Islands. Current position in Piton Hospitality Group, voting common 47.3%. Acquired across the period from January 2019 through April of this year. The second, Eleanor's COVID-era leverage. Spring of 2020. A margin facility executed against the family preferred share series collateral she would underestimate it through a downturn she hadn't anticipated. By December, she had quietly defaulted. The shares were liquida, aided through 3 intermediaries. 2 of those intermediaries were nominees of Silas Renwick's. She had sold to the man she would later try to chase out of Charleston with a $10,000 check. Silas closed his eyes briefly, opened them. The third folder, Thursday morning, 9 o'clock, 14th floor of the Piton Tower. Agenda Item 3, a strategic restructuring designed to remove Hadley Piton as Chief Operating Officer and consolidate authority in Eleanor's office. She had the votes, barely. She would reference the plasterwork rebid. She would reference the half-step at the Gala. Foster looked at him across the table. You can stop it. Thursday morning. But only if you are ready to stop being Silas Renwick, the contractor. Silas thought of Marin. He thought of Wren upstairs at the cottage, asleep with her braid undone. He thought of Hadley sitting on the harbor side step in the dark, not asking him for anything. He nodded once. Foster slid the third folder across the table. Then I will see you Thursday morning, the 25th of June, 9th floor lobby of the Piton Tower at 8:40. Silas rode the elevator to the 14th floor alone, wearing a charcoal suit cut 3 years ago by a Boston tailor on Newbury Street. No work jacket, no scuffed boots, shoes polished. The envelope, finally open, rested in his inside breast pocket. The board convened at 9 sharp. 12 directors. Eleanor at the head of the long mahogany table. Hadley to her left in a slate suit, hands resting on a closed leather portfolio. Foster Linwood at his usual chair third from the corner. Eleanor opened the restructuring motion with the careful language of someone who had been rehearsing it for weeks. The boardroom door opened. Silas walked in calmly. He did not look around. He walked to the empty seat at the far end of the table, Beauregard Piton's old chair, unused for decades, and he sat. Hadley turned. Her breath caught once, silently. No one saw it but Foster. Foster did not look up. Eleanor laughed once. I'm sorry. Mr. Renwick, what exactly is the contractor doing in a closed session of the Piton board? Foster stood. He slid the top folder down the length of the table until it stopped in front of Eleanor. Madame Chair, Foster said. The contractor is the controlling shareholder. The room did not move. Eleanor opened the folder. 47.3% voting common. Renwick Holdings. 14 LLCs, notarized, audited, certified. Her face did not show shock. Her face showed the particular stillness of a woman who has just understood she has been losing for 6 years without knowing it. Her left hand on the table gave her away, a thumb moving once against the pad of her index finger. A small, dry motion. Foster had seen the same motion in Eleanor's mother in 1991 when a bond auction had gone the wrong way. Silas spoke for the first time as himself. His voice was quiet. He did not stand. Under articles. Even, Section 11 of the corporate bylaws, a holder of majority voting common may, by written shareholder action, remove the chair and appoint a successor without further board approval. I am exercising that right today. Eleanor Piton is removed as chairwoman effective at the close of this sentence. Hadley Piton is appointed chairwoman and chief executive officer, effective immediately. He set a single signed page on the table. Eleanor stood. She opened her mouth. She did not find the words. She walked out. Hadley remained seated, hands flat on the leather portfolio. Silas looked at her once. He did not speak. He stood, crossed to the door, and left her the chair. She sat at the head of the table alone. For a long moment, she did not move. Then she exhaled. The way a person exhales when something they have been holding for 11 years is finally allowed to rest. That is when he realized the truth. This was never about the company. It was never about the shares or the votes, or the bylaws or the 47.3%. It was about a woman named Marin Piton Renwick, who had loved a garden and a cousin and a company she believed was worth saving, and who had trusted in her last week on Earth that the right people would find each other in time. Friday evening, 7:40. Hadley parked on Anson Street and sat behind the wheel for 2 minutes before getting out. Silas opened the door before she knocked. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon bullet, Marin's brand, and sat across from her at the kitchen table and waited. Hadley wrapped both hands around her glass. She did not drink. Who was Marin to you? He had practiced the answer many times over 6 years. He had never said it out loud. She was my wife. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the magnolia branch scraped the gutter once and stopped. He told her everything. Boston, 2013. The vote 8-4. Marin walking out of the Piton Tower at 11:15 on a Tuesday and not coming back. State Street, 4 months later. The wedding in May of 2014. Wren, born in 2017. The diagnosis in November of 2018. 18 months. February 4th, 2020. In her last week, she asked me one thing. He did not ask for revenge. She did not ask me to take it apart. She asked me to keep it standing. She said the company was the best of her. You said she wanted it to outlive the people who had broken it. He paused. And she said her cousin Hadley would be ready by the time it mattered. Hadley began to cry then without sound. The way women cry when they have been polite about grief for a very long time. Silas did not move to her. He let her have it. He sat across the table and watched the magnolia branch outside the window and did not look away. When she stopped, she lifted her face. Her eyes were red. Why didn't you take it for yourself? He answered without hesitation. Because Marin would have given it to you. A long breath went out of Hadley. The kind of breath a person releases when she has finally been told the thing she has been waiting to hear for half her life. She picked up the bourbon. She drank. He drank. Outside, somewhere down Anson Street, a screen door closed gently, the crooked one. A one he had never fixed, and the Charleston night went on without them, the way it always had. December came to Charleston with thin gold light and a cold harbor breeze that made coats necessary by 5. The Beaumont Inn reopened on a Saturday the 11th with a small ceremony in the walled garden. 80 people. The Historic Preservation Board. Greta. In a black wool coat, standing at the back with 3 white camellias in a mason jar tied with string, which she set at the base of the magnolia before the ceremony began. She did not sign her name to it. She did not need to. A small bronze plaque had been set into the brick at the base of the trunk. The Marin Piton Renwick Memorial Garden. Hadley spoke for 4 minutes without notes. She spoke about a cousin who had taught her to read a balance sheet at 16. She spoke about a woman who had sat on this bench every Sunday and called the magnolia the only honest thing on the property. He said the name 3 times. Marin, Marin, Marin. The crowd applauded the soft, slow applause of Charleston, the applause of people who do not need to make noise to mean what they mean. Isla stood at the back with Wren on his shoulders. Wren wore a red coat. Her hands were on top of his head. She was watching Hadley the whole time. When the crowd thinned, Hadley walked over to them. She did not speak first. Wren leaned down and reached out one mittened hand. Hadley took it. The 3 of them stood under the magnolia. The plaque at their feet caught the last of the light. Hadley said, very quietly, "Don't go back to Boston." Silas looked at her for a long moment. He did not smile. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been walking toward for many years. We weren't. Planning to? A beat. If that's an invitation, we will take it? She nodded. He nodded. Aaron grinned wide and toothy and uncomplicated because she was 8. And 8 knows what staying means before the grown-ups have agreed to the word. The 3 of them turned and walked down the brick path together toward the garden gate. The light went out of the sky in degrees behind them. The gate clicked shut. She had asked him to stay. He had been staying all along.